To get in is really good. I had a nice conversation with you the other day. I'm looking forward, and I asked you please to bear with me because I'm not very knowledgeable, but glad you could get here. And in the audience, welcome very, very much. Our guest is Amitabh Jordan, and we've got him billed on the credit and the graphics and so forth as a Buddhist and also a clairvoyant counselor, which is all very interesting. And he is obviously of the Buddhist persuasion, and we're going to be talking about that. Here amidst all of the talk, we're talking on the day after Barack Obama gave a talk to the world about the military, economic, the realpolitik questions in the country of Afghanistan and so forth. So that's really roiling the earth and the politics and the normal things that are constituting what we call the news and so forth. We're going to talk some about Buddhism and about things spiritual on this section, and I really welcome you, Amitabh, very much.
Thanks, Harold.
Please, as I suggested, you might bear with us and share your own background, born and raised, educated, and that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I've lived in New York for over 30 years, and originally I came from Western New York State, and went to art school in Boston.
Okay. Which school?
Massachusetts Institute of Art.
Okay, right. Okay, I'm interested in Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Oh,
MIT.
It's across the river.
Across the
It's
river.
on the other side of the
Cheek
river.
by jowl. Are they connected institutionally or not? Or
No,
are
I
they
don't think
separate?
so.
No, okay.
I don't believe so.
Oh, but you were interested in the arts, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Were you an artist or artistically
Yes, I was.
inclined? In which
I
of
was
the
a
media?
painter and a sculptor.
Which painting? You're a sculptor also? Both.
Yes.
In the round.
I got involved in painting. I loved painting, and then I also got involved in sculptures. And for some period of time, I lived in Western Massachusetts, and I had a lot of space there that
Around
I could
Amherst,
really further out towards Pittsfield, and Stockbridge.
There's a lot of cultural things going on in Western Massachusetts.
Very much.
Yeah. And the painting, did you oil, acrylic?
Oil paintings.
Oil.
Yeah, oil paintings.
Worked large or small, abstract or figurative?
No, figurative.
Figurative,
and which wasn't really happening at the time.
Really?
And
okay.
I guess they were like about 36 by 36, something like that.
That's pretty big. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
portraits.
Portrait. Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I think of Rembrandt.
Yeah.
I think of, the
Oh,
great
these
portrait.
weren't like Rembrandt. These are the portraits of a clairvoyant.
Oh, I see. Okay. A
These are
little bit
clairvoyant portraits.
esoteric, right? Were you always, in a certain sense, going way back when you were interested in art, it's a jump, in a certain sense, although not necessarily to Buddhism and clairvoyance. And
Yes,
so
it is.
But were you having experiences that gave you a sense of a unique consciousness?
Yeah, absolutely. The first I noticed was I was about 5 years old.
Really?
And I recognized something then, and tried to deal with it as a child, and really didn't have anyone to speak to about it.
Right.
But then, as I got older, it was really something I didn't want to deal with. It was really something I wanted to forget about, in some sense. But then, when I came to New York, I realized it was a gift, and it was a gift to give to others. And so I started practicing
This
and
it
speaking
that you're
to
talking about is a state of consciousness?
The
or
gift is the ability.
An epiphany, or what?
Well, it's the ability to be clairvoyant for people and help them.
Okay, right. Okay, clairvoyant. Okay, I don't know if there's a direct connection. There may or may not be between Buddhism and clairvoyance.
There is. Yeah.
But and you sense that did it come out in your relationship with your family when you were young? You were a teenager and all that
No,
stuff?
not really. I mean, I knew things.
And what was the characteristics of it, as you called it, the clairvoyant experience?
Clairvoyant experience. Well, I would know when something was going to happen. Let's say you said something to me, "I'll meet you tomorrow." I would walk away and think, "No, that's not going to happen."
Okay. That could be born of experience or something where people didn't show up when they said they're going to, or I'm going to send you an email and you never get it, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Or many situations like that, many experiences like that. But it wasn't really something I focused on until I got older. And I realized that it was really a gift to give to
others. Did you let the
others.
people around you know that you had these?
Not particularly.
Not particularly.
No, not particularly.
No. Okay. Are there a number of people in? There's got approaching 7 billion people in the world now. Maybe you've done a little research on it. Are there many people that have this? Some people call themselves psychic, or they're psychic. That's another term that is cheek by jowl with.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, it's an abused term. It can be abused by certain people.
Yeah, right.
There are other people that have the ability. I mean, my own feeling is that everyone has the ability, but we're not others are not, for whatever reason, can't speak to it or don't see it, so they don't see certain things. I mean, the way it functions is, I think it probably functions a little bit different for everyone.
Okay.
For me, as a clairvoyant, the way it functions for me many times, not always, many times, is I'll actually see a picture of something, and this would be, let's say, something in your future or your past, something like that.
You're talking to a person that you're relating to.
Right. Like, let's say there was be a person here, and that I would be talking to them.
Well, like, say, me.
Okay.
Okay.
And that I would see a picture of something. And when I say a picture, I mean I would see you in a certain circumstance, in a certain room.
Not the circumstance you're in with them at the time.
No, it would be something different.
Would it be an elaborate scene? Would it be a palace?
It would be in color.
It would be in color, and it's separate from what you're seeing as you look through your two eyes.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's in a different part of your mind, or your mind's eye?
That I don't know.
Okay, but when you see it, you actually see it like you would see a
it's very clear.
movie projection?
Yeah, very clear. It's very clear.
Okay, that's interesting.
But within that picture is all the information about your emotional state, what you're thinking, who's around you, what other people are around you. So let's say that picture turned out to be 5 years from now or something. I would have to identify the time, which is difficult to do, and generally
the time of the picture,
what I'm
the
seeing.
clairvoyancy.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I would have to identify that, but basically I would know many things about you in that picture
that one would not know in the normal consciousness.
You couldn't know.
Yeah, right. And that's something. Did it become more acute, more well developed with age and so forth? And you said
the more you use it, the more you use it,
the more it becomes
acute. It becomes
acute.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it clear, or is it vague?
Well, sometimes it's vague, and sometimes it's clear.
Okay.
It can be either. I think if it's really clear, generally speaking, to me, it means it's close in time. Or,
if it's clear?
Yeah, if it's very close in time. If it's
right.
a little more vague, it means to me that it's further away.
How elaborate is the picture that you see? Do you see things in detail? Do you ever see a calendar with a headline of a newspaper or anything like that? I'm asking these silly questions.
Yeah, possibly. It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
It's possible.
And you're looking, is it like looking at a movie?
Yes.
Okay.
But
in color?
Yeah.
It's Technicolor?
Yeah, but I wouldn't need the...
You had that even before they had Technicolor in Hollywood?
That's correct.
Okay, right.
Like we see in color.
And there were people who could do this back centuries ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't need a newspaper, though, because people are your emotional state. So let's say a year from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, 5 years ago, we're in certain emotional states, and there's certain people in our life that are helping us with that emotional state. It could be an emotional state that we don't want to be in.
Or hindering us.
Right.
Threatening
but it could
us,
be something that we do want to be in, too.
Okay. And
so it could be anything.
Okay. And could you give any examples of that or anything off the top of your head? Like, I have a friend of mine, Maggie, some people know. She has an element of this.
Okay.
And it was very interesting because she was in a state of consciousness where she felt she had to do it, and she finally did. She actually went to the police department, the local precinct, and told them that she had
volunteered?
this. No, volunteered. And volunteered that there was something going to happen. And it was vague and everything. And it had to do with Middle East. It had to do with politics. It had to do with disaster. And that was about 2 or 3 days before 9/11.
Okay.
She had that it was like a kind of psychic or a reading, enough to where she had to go try to the authorities, and of course they were saying, well, thank you, ma'am, and everything. But do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
So you said before, a lot of people have this or think they have it, and some have it very well developed, and others tune it out, maybe, by conditioning? Or?
Well, yes, that's right. That we just don't listen to a voice like that. You know,
right.
It's not concrete to them, and so they don't listen to it.
Or pay attention. You're listening, you're viewing. It's multisensorial.
It's multisensorial. It's more like, I think human beings, there's a lot of noise in our life, and I think there's so much noise that it just blocks it out. That's my thought. That would be my thought.
Have you given a great deal of, let's say, scholarly research into this phenomena or not? Or
no.
You have not?
Well, when I was younger, I used to be silly and think that I knew how it worked in some sense, or I had some sort of idea how it worked, but I really don't have any idea how it works.
Oh, that's very.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for just sort of in a very real sense. Even if you're how materialistic, how scientific, how mathematical you are, it's good to accept at some level in terms of universe and the larger elements.
It just
and
is.
Mystery.
Yeah.
There's mystery, a priori mystery in the universe, and I think it's going to be like that. Even if we get a handle on things in a contemporary way now, we're still going to be brought into another state of consciousness which will be nested in mystery.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just a philosophical thing. Was the Buddhism thing in league with your artistic and your clairvoyancy, or did it come after, or when did that? Is it? Are those two things relevant to you? The Buddhism and the clairvoyancy, do they go hand in hand?
They do go hand in hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experiences with Buddhism, and what was the religious or spiritual tradition of your family setting, your early family setting?
Oh, my family were Catholics.
Catholic.
Yeah, there was Catholics.
Seriously, so was it important?
But no, they were like lapsed Catholics.
You weren't an altar boy.
No.
Okay. That's the state of a lot of people.
Yeah.
Secular minded.
Right.
Were they intellectually inclined or no?
No, not particularly.
No. Okay.
No. I think that how it comes together with Buddhism is that Buddha was said to be clairvoyant. So, in other words, Buddha could see all things. And we in the West, we have certain ideas about being enlightened and Buddha and so forth, like an individual walks on water or something like that.
Yeah.
But two most interesting things about Buddha was that Buddha was human, like we are.
About 5th century BC.
Yes, that's right.
Son of a local king.
Yes, that's correct.
We know Siddhartha?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Right.
And when Buddha died, he forbid any images of him to be made. And so what people did was they talked about and they made copies of Buddha's footprints. So his footprints were about. There was a person who was here.
Yeah, he was.
And here's the proof that he was here.
Yeah.
Then in the when Alexander the Great conquered the world,
that was about in 300 or so.
Right.
BC, yeah. Up in Bactria, they called Afghanistan then. Yeah.
Then he, when he would take over a territory, he would give it to one of his generals or officers, and they would become the governor. And these people were Macedonians, and some of these people became Buddhists, and they were aghast that there were no statues of Buddha because there were statues back home, that there were statues of all their leaders were.
Yeah, and we had people before we had even Zoroastrianism or Mitra or any of the things that lead to the normal or the contemporary ideas of spirituality and religion. There were things like Thor and Zeus and all of these things.
Right.
There's been it seems to be a need in the part of human consciousness to have some understanding of the questions that came along with the self-reflective consciousness that was characteristic of Homo sapiens.
Yes, that's right.
To understand what it's all about, Alfie, kind of
that's
questions. Right. They've been there, and for good or ill.
Yeah, for
probably
good or ill.
On the balance for good, gives a sense of identity and purpose that it seems needful in the human consciousness. But anyway, that's so Alexandria's generals were not wondering why there weren't some statues of Zor.
And so what they did then was that they had statues of Buddha made, and that's where the images of Buddha come. So the images that we have today of Buddha all come from that time. But the reason that Buddha talked about not having images of him made is that he didn't want his image identified with what he had to say was the Dharma. That the Dharma was about emptiness, and the Dharma belonged to everyone.
Okay, that's interesting, very interesting to me. Dharma, when I think of, I've looked, Dharma bums, Ginsburg and a lot of those Trungpa Rinpoche and things. Dharma is in a certain sense like the way or the law.
The law. Yeah.
The law. That's very interesting because we had concepts in the Western tradition of natural law. And also, if I may, just a sidebar, because we are in the season of Afghanistan and so forth in terms of the material world. Noah Feldman, a real scholar, I guess he's Harvard now, had written really interestingly on, let's say, Islam. He happens to be of a Jewish background and so forth, but he'd written on it, and he said essentially what it is in terms of the, we're maybe jumping ahead, but we'll come back to the
sure.
story you're telling, that the Sharia, or the idea of Sharia, essentially what it is would be comparable to what is called Dharma, or the law, or the way of the world, or something that is giving structure.
Right.
And that's what people want,
Right.
and what they
Right.
need in order to give some sense of understanding what the hell it's all about.
That's right.
Is that so? It seems to be characteristic of all the spiritual traditions, and probably has a great deal to do with secular notions of how we can get identity in terms of our being in universe and so forth. Just a thought. But anyway, I'm sorry I got off on an attack. But it means the law.
Yes, it means the law.
And we talk about rule of law in a secular way, and how important that is.
Yes.
Instead of chaos.
And it's looked at as a living jewel. It's described as a living jewel because it can be and has been reinterpreted for every age and every culture.
Right.
So therefore, it is regarded as a living jewel.
When you say that, Dharma.
Yeah, the Dharma.
Dharma is an important word.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And Siddhartha, or Buddha, was the son of a local king, and the king, if I'm correct, that the son was destined to be either a king in a normal sense, or perhaps a spiritual leader, and he kept him enclosed within the palace until he was 27 or something. Before he then got out on his own and went and found a spiritual path among them, and created this what's called Buddhism.
Yeah,
and it's a very many splendored thing. There's a lot of different variations of that, and it's also nested, it seems to me, if I may, within the Rig Veda and with the Sanskrit and with the Vedic tradition generally, that is characteristic of South Central Asia.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's more
can you
of an
put some of
Asian
that
thought.
in context historically?
Sure. What Buddha discovered when he left the palace, so the story goes, was suffering.
Yeah.
And his father had kept suffering from him, or his family had kept suffering from him. And so he recognized
sort of like a
suffering.
gated community.
Yes, and you can imagine going through India today, you see suffering, and then also, many, many years ago, thousands of years ago, you would see suffering. Then, too, you'd see people with deformities and, going hungry and dying in the street and so forth. And this impressed him very much.
Yeah.
And so he set about trying to discover what this suffering was all about.
Why?
Well, he wanted to relieve people of their suffering.
Right.
And how could he do that?
Right.
And so, basically, Buddhism...
And worked on himself as well.
That's...
In a meditative...
For 7 years, meditated. He tried various things. He tried to starve himself, not eat.
Nearly did, except the young lady gave him something at a critical moment. Milk, was it?
Milk.
Yeah.
And he recognized that there isn't anything I can do to myself physically that's going to make me enlightened. It's another path.
Well, you talked about a lot of things, enlightened. We talk about enlightened, and we talk about nirvana, and these things that come out of that, and there's many interpretations of it. Was it how does it nest within, if I may, because we can talk about the East and West. Who was it that said, George said, the West shall shake, the East awake while you have the night for the morn. And we're all part of, we know one thing, don't we? We know that we're all part of a system. All of humanity, in fact, all of the ecology and everything
we're all part
is
of life.
all one system. And we're within a universe. We know these things increasingly both from science and from our spiritual traditions. But the science thing is coming up maybe since the Enlightenment. We're coming to get more and more understanding of things and all of that. But you also had in that East-West notion of the way the world is seen, and like Joyce said, the West shall shake, the East awake while you have the night for the morn. And we maybe and so forth. But what I'm getting at is Buddhism, in terms of its relationship to the Vedic, because we have the Hindu and we have that, and I tend to think of it as a heresy. Buddhism was a heresy, so Siddhartha or Buddha would be within an environment. Was in North India,
North India,
and was in an environment that had a spiritual or a philosophical tradition coming that was part of what we call Hindu or the Vedic.
Yes.
Can you set those two things straight?
Well,
because it interests me that it's a heresy upon the established authority, which is Vedic, And then there are heresies upon the Western tradition, which is, Mithra and Zoroastrianism and Judaism and Christianity. There's some and it might be in those areas of heresy, if it's called heresy, that the interesting new notions that relate to our current temporary situation are maybe to be found. So it's worth paying attention to this Buddhism, which seems to have captured the attention of much of the world.
Of many people. It's the, it's the
yeah,
fastest
including
growing,
yourself.
fastest growing spiritual thing.
Buddhism
today.
It is really
around the world.
You sure? Are you sure of that?
That's
that
what
includes
I've heard.
that includes Muslim and Muslims growing very rapidly too. We can get to that maybe in a minute. But I'm sorry, I got a lot of interconnected things there.
Well,
how did it relate to the Vedic traditions in which he was born?
In the beginning, see, Buddha was from northern India.
Yeah.
And in northern India, the Hindus have the belief or have the understanding of non-dualism.
Right.
And so, but not in the southern Hinduism is not as strong. So
there's Dravidian in the south.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have you have the situation where the major difference between Hindu and Buddhism is that in Hinduism there are living gods. Certain individuals are living gods.
Wow.
And that's accepted. In Buddhism, no one is a living god. Now, it's very important when you understand that what that really means is that to a Buddhist, you must take complete control of your own life.
So very individualistic
right.
in that sense.
So you are totally the master of your own life. You're totally responsible for everything in your life. If there is a living God, then you could go to that God, and that God would be responsible for you in some way or another. In Buddhism, you are completely responsible for yourself. That's a very big difference.
That is a big difference, isn't it?
And all religions around the world, they're always it's always a situation where there's someone who has more authority than you do.
Yeah.
And in Buddhism, only you have that authority. And this is why Buddha wanted to be known as a human being. Did not want to be known as a supernatural being. This is why he didn't want images of him made, because he didn't want to be, honored in that way and turned into a supernatural being. So it's very important.
Didn't the Judies have that golden calf? They didn't want to have images made and so forth. There was that same thing appeared in the Judaic tradition.
It's similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Similar.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So
but that is a big jump, because Jehovah appears in the Western tradition, and we used to have Thor and Zeus and all these things in the ancient religious systems that were there in order to give some understanding. Again, keep that in mind. And I suppose Cro-Magnon cavemen had something worshiping the great bison.
Probably.
Something
probably.
to get, you understand
animals.
what I mean. It seems to be inherent
Mm-hmm.
in consciousness to want to have some idea of what the larger issues are about. We call it God, or we have different traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so he had that.
So the Dharma really is about taking that responsibility for yourself and unwinding.
Well, if I may, the Dharma would be the law or the Roy.
Right.
And that would be like rule of law, the structure.
That's correct. Yeah. The structure about how do we understand the world? Reality. As a Buddhist. Yeah. How do we cope with reality? And there is there are various. There's a lot of text. There's a lot of text. There's many scripts.
Sure.
And but they were turned into, to my understanding, something more. Starting to form into something more around the year 300.
Around the time of BC.
And
Alexander's time.
That I'm not sure about, whether it was AD or BC. And,
I see. Okay.
These were people, monks that would come together and sort of started to hash out things. And from that tradition, in Tibet now, monks get in circles and argue with each other. And the reason they argue with each other is so that they all understand the same thing. So I have a point of view, and someone argues with me. But it's not an emotional argument, it's an intellectual argument, so that I understand better, what.
Is it as bad as the differences between the various rabbis? and interpret.
Well, there are big differences between
or we
the
have
Tibetans.
differences we fought wars over in the name of Catholic as opposed
Tibetans
to
have fought
Protestant,
wars
and we have
in the
these
past,
wars over them intellectually over them. A lot of the wars and suffering, Inquisition was pretty ugly in terms of absolute truths that are trying to be found and asserting absolute truths for the whole of the universe beyond and even into multi-universes that weren't going to become even thought of ever before. We had superstring theory coming out of physics and a whole enlightenment and everything that was going on, a whole evolutionary process. So there's still, and a lot of wars and suffering has been caused, the Crusades has been caused by one group thinking they had the absolute truth about the universe, that they were the ones who had the truth, and the others were infidels. And it still goes on.
Well, that's correct. Dualism.
And then there dualism, and then also the political ramifications of that by the secular-oriented people who probably haven't paid a lot of attention to the strictures that are often part of the wisdom schools about doing the best for the least among you and so forth have been roundly ignored by the powers of
taking care of the suffering.
But they don't seem to bother about the suffering few. They always just take care of the few that are in the gated community living well, the political leadership of the time.
Well, the great problem with humans is that humans believe that they can gain something, and really we can't really gain anything. And we can say that money is lent to us in this lifetime, and it's dispersed after we go. All things are lent to us, and we experience all things. So we can't really gain. The only thing that we can gain is happiness. The only thing that we can gain is becoming enlightened and bring about happiness for ourselves in a personal way that way.
That's interesting, yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting.
It's one of the big points.
I would think it is, yeah. That's a big point. Also, that it's individualized and that kind of thing. It puts a lot of responsibility on that. And then they go through various... Isn't there that in the Vedic also, though? They have gurus. They have gurus to whom you go, and then you go through a yogic discipline to achieve a certain state of consciousness within the Vedic tradition. And in the in the Eastern tradition, Vedic tradition, seems to be that consciousness is like given, out of which emerges the material world. And the West tends to be more oriented toward the material world, evolution, perhaps, material world, a different sense of time, and a different sense from which consciousness evolves. So we have the work of Darwin, and millions of years ago there was no Homo sapien consciousness. There was an evolutionary coming out of the material, but the Vedics assume consciousness and that the material world comes from that. And that's great emptiness or something. It's a big, important distinction, East-West.
Yes, very big.
Okay.
Well, emptiness is a wonderful concept.
Yeah, I know you like that,
Emptiness is that all things are emptiness. All things take place in emptiness, and that we do not have the ability to see all things. So, in other words, incomprehensible. There are certain things in emptiness that are incomprehensible, and there's two very silly and clear examples. A dog can smell 1 part urine in 1,000,000 parts water.
Really?
I will never be able to do that.
No,
I will never be able to have that experience.
No.
So just in this simple thing of every day, a dog has experiences that I could never have. They're incomprehensible to me.
I think the smelling of a dog, I read or saw somewhere, is something 50 times more acute than ours.
Yes, that's right.
It's a whole different consciousness and balance of sensory ratios and everything like that.
So if we take that one small example, supposedly an eagle can see 5 miles, can see a rabbit move on the ground 5 miles away in the right landscape. Now we'll never be able to experience that either.
No, we wouldn't.
And,
so it depends on your criteria. It depends on your criteria of what is significant. And we were probably pretty vulnerable in the early stage. We've been here a couple 100,000 years, if the evolutionary record is correct, and as a Homo sapiens species and so forth. And we were probably prey for a long time, because you were saying swiftness. It would have been pretty hard to outrun a cheetah.
That's right.
Or a jaguar on a grassy plain if we were evolving there. And we were probably prey. In fact, there's evidence that we were prey for a very long time to some of the other creatures and so forth. And the whole evolutionary process and They just discovered, it was amazing to me, they just came with this new fossil, Ardipithecus. Major development, 700,000 years or 400,000 years earlier than Lucy, the Australopithecine line. We understand the evolution of human beings as a species that we didn't know. We only could conjecture because we were so vastly ignorant. But we were growing all the time, and then there was a new consciousness that came with Homo sapien. And one wonders if we're coming to a state of a new consciousness as we get to the point after 10,000 generations of extending our capability through technology or tools unique to us, that we spoke, you and I, the other day, and it's come up in the discussion around the thing that Mr. Obama's talking about with Afghanistan, existential challenge from Muslim and that kind of stuff, and that the weapon systems that have been developed by the princes of the world in order to gain advantage, they could steal the grain from somebody else and let their tribe purge, all nationalism, all special interest groups and everything like that, have apparently gotten, I think we disagreed, or you did, which was interesting, that they are now, particularly on the germ side, and some of the things they call wave weapons out of dark ops research and so forth, that if they were to be unleashed, as they have been, with alarming regularity in the human experience, with hatred and full tilt thing that's being ginned up by a lot of people now, that it would mean the end of our species, possibly. That is the case that we've reached in terms of this extended capability of consciousness that we call tools or technology. We've reached a point where we have a great understanding and we can control things very well, the West and so forth, but that we're at a time of a qualitative transformation like we were before we were Homo sapien in an evolutionary term. That's going way off into other areas of where we stand now.
We have an understanding.
But we're in an existential new relationship to the universe now, in this year 2009 of the Christian era, than ever we have been, it seems to me. When the weapon systems we were gestating with our ability to destroy each other. New movie out now, really a well-make, if I may, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's really good. The theme of it is that there's another civilization representative coming here, and their purpose is to wipe out the human species because they're about to destroy the Earth. And the Earth is a very careful ecological thing, and we can't allow them to destroy the Earth of which they are a part, and that's the theme of it. And it's one that is probably relevant, and we don't have a system that is able to bring us into a new state of consciousness evolutionarily in place that can be understood politically and so forth. So that's the theme of the movie. And it's one that you couldn't have done that in the 6th century. We had bow and arrows. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting.
Could you deal with some of that?
Those movies, those movies assume that if there were other beings on other worlds, that they are also involved in gaining, and that they would also see another species as something that they could gain dominion over. And that's the human thought, the idea of gaining.
Why is that human and not part of the structure of universal mind, if we were to go to universal mind?
Well,
or how do we deal with the large issues in something other than the propagandistic ways in which various political entities and so forth have dealt with it in order to get an advantage over another or form the basis of their national identity or whatever?
Sure. First, we have to accept suffering. We have to accept that we live and experience an ocean of suffering, that it has no beginning and no end. It was always there. It will always be there. And we have to accept that in its totality.
Well, that's back again to that accepting, in the end, a priori mystery.
Yes. That we just accept that the suffering is there, and that when...
Or wait a minute, if I may, and fine point, is a thing to say suffering, that would be like injustice in a certain sense, but it would also mean it's what is a term coming out of science and that sort of thing, synergy, that it's mystery, isn't necessarily suffering. It's mystery and unknowable within the context in which events are being taken measure of. So that
it's an aspect of that.
If we were back 2 million years ago, Australopithecine, there's no way that consciousness that we can sit and talk, you and I now, and clairvoyant with one another and all the rest of it. There was no way that could have been 2 million years ago because there was an evolutionary process, changes of brain, that kind of thing, all kinds of things going on, you see? So that's like a speciation.
Well,
and speciation
that's right.
comes all at once after a gestation.
Right.
We're coming to we're coming to a new relationship to the cosmos that if we make it, we're going to be in an association with the cosmos at the end of time, or that we're coming, it's like leaving the womb or something, maybe. That happened 200,000 years ago in the evolution of our species and consciousness. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily suffering. There is suffering, but the suffering is more mystery, and we can't know. It'll only, if we get to a state beyond Homo sapien consciousness, we have a resonancy of a, let's say, liberated order. We want to get back to your thing talking about the liberation and the nirvana and that sort of thing. But if we had a thing where, speaking from the Western thing, it's always we only hear just a few people. The leaders, that's all we know. Look back through history, we got emperors, we got kings, we got all this kind of stuff. The political leaders, we only hear bankers now in the current thing. We have leaders and everything, and you never have a thing, or an orchestra.
Right.
If you have an orchestra, and each of the people in the and all you hear in the orchestra are the tubas and the bass drums, that would be like our political leaders who are saying, let's go fight wars and all the rest of it. And they gin us all up and manipulate us and everything. But if you get a thing where there's a liberated order, vast majority of the human population trying to live on practically nothing, they're in very desperate suffering.
Yeah.
The suffering often is materialistic. I mean, you need penicillin to save the kid. I mean, it takes a quarter to do it, or something. You know what I'm saying? So you have that, so you don't have it. So if you had a thing where the whole orchestra, the whole human orchestra within the ecology is liberated to where they can realize their own given potential in a Buddhist sense, then that whole orchestra, you would hear the resonancy of the whole orchestra rather than just a few leaders.
That's right.
You would hear that. Then there would be a resonancy of the orchestra that will relate us to universe at a level transcendent to what we've been throughout the human experience. And that resonancy we cannot know until we get there.
That's right.
You can't know the ultimate structure of the universe because that's the great unknown.
And
it will
you may
introduce
never know.
us into another level of a priori mystery within the way the universe is structured. But our challenge is to get to where we have liberation for the whole orchestra of the human society and the ecology, and we're failing. And the science fiction things are telling us we haven't got a system that can bring about universal justice and liberation of the masses.
We have Buddhism.
Well, the Buddhism you say would. Okay, that addresses that. Okay.
Because, you see, the issue and what causes so many people pain in politics, especially politics is an easy place to see it, but also bankers and, you know, as the example that you used. The idea here is that I can gain something.
Yeah.
And I can gain something by pushing you aside or taking something from you. I can gain something valuable to myself. And this thing that we gain, it's possible, yeah. If you gain $10 from me, you've gained $10 from me. But that money will not help you in your understanding. That money will
not help you pass the pearly gates.
It may not. It's not going to help you become enlightened. And the Buddhist understanding is that we are alive to become enlightened. We are alive to help each other. We're not alive for any other purpose. Now we have to.
Wait a minute. You got two
living.
different things. You got one thing that's individualized, and then you all of a sudden quickly morphed over to help each other.
Yes.
Now there's two different. There's a duality there. If I'm out for myself only, then I want everything for me, and I don't care about anybody else. That's one view of it. Do you understand? That's the duality that's
well,
there.
this would be Tibetan Buddhism, is the understanding that we wish to become enlightened, but we also wish to become bodhisattvas and help other beings.
Could I deal with that? That's also in the Vedic, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And they have this idea that if you meditate, and that's really getting into a different state of relationship with your consciousness. And we now know it has to do with neurotransmitters in the brain, the way the brain is wired.
That's right.
10 to the 10th power
it makes
neurons,
sense to us.
and they have axions, and they have neurotransmitters. There's a biochemical model for consciousness, all states of consciousness. And if you have a yogic state, if you go through a yogic discipline, you will arrive at a state of consciousness that is different than the normal state.
That's right.
And that's called in Buddhism, if I'm not mistaken, to set me straight, is that that's like enlightened or nirvana or samadhi?
Nirvana would be happiness, a state of happiness.
Okay.
And the other side of nirvana is samsara, and samsara is a state of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So we could look at the world and we could say, well, here's everyone's thinking of gaining.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks they can gain from someone else.
Yeah.
Even no matter how poor they are, they still believe that they can gain something from someone else. They can take from someone else and gain something. The idea that we have competitions, even the Olympics, is an idea of gaining.
Do you ever see people fight over soccer matches in Europe?
Yes, that's
We're
right.
number one.
That's right.
We're number one.
So
you go back to
they're
the locker
gaining,
room.
they're
they
gaining
got
this intangible, transparent thing,
Yeah.
and really nothing is gained. So if you are very upset today, and next week or a month from now or a year from now, I said, so on December 3rd, or whatever today is, what were you so upset about?
Yeah, right. You won't remember. Right.
You won't remember
right.
because it has no meaning. It has no larger meaning, but we work
in the larger
ourselves.
context. In the moment, you're all upset
yes,
by it. Yeah, right.
In the moment, we're suffering.
Yeah, right.
But in the end, we're going to suffer over one thing or another until we've learned that we can't really gain anything, that nothing can be really gained.
This is all really interesting, and I want to say hello right now to the people in the control room and to the people viewing. You may hear loud noise. That's drumming going on in the other studio, and so we're taking a little kind of break to get in touch with Willie and the people in the control room on that matter, and the people doing it. They're Uruguayans, and there's really good music, and it would be really good. They're up from Montevideo. There's that, and then I also mentioned to you, Willie, so you'll realize and let me know, I forgot to push the timer. So you could let me know when we get to the end. Give me a cue that and run the graphics and so forth to come to the end because my timer didn't get set. So that's a sidebar thing. But this thing, please. So this idea of bodhisattva you mentioned, right? Or if you get to a state in the Buddhist, and you get to a state where you arrive at what do you call it? Liberation.
Yes.
Or
enlightenment.
You do, but then there is within the that's what I'm talking about, the orchestra before. That would be like you could be Mr. Hitler, and you are enlightened. You think you are enlightened, and you have a vision and so forth, and it has nothing to do with anybody else except your vision that is God-given or something. All these kind of megalomaniacal things that happen to CEOs and other peoples and so forth. But you have that, but then it has no concern for the whole of everyone else. But in the term of Vedic and I think Buddhism, they have the idea of bodhisattva. That's someone who's enlightened. They're at another stage of liberated consciousness. But then let me just get and then but instead of realizing, tasting the nectar, enjoying the present, the state, instead of that, they come back to the plane of material reality or everyone else, and to set up a condition where everybody realizes their own inner enlightenment.
That's correct.
And that the idea of individual enlightenment in the ultimate sense is a chimera. It's not possible. That only the whole system must be liberated or enlightened.
Yes, that's correct.
And that the bodhisattva would be like a shepherd, the last to go through the gate rather than the first. And most people are just racing like the devil to get through that gate so they can beat everybody else.
That's right. Well,
that's the context of things now. So that bodhisattva idea is one, and our leadership doesn't seem to have any system or bother to have any system or haven't had a system that made it possible to think about everybody and the ecology and the whole system being in a new state of relationship to the universe that has never been characteristic of history because it's an evolutionary process taking part in time.
That's correct.
And that we're coming to a new relationship, back to that question, that we may blow it all up.
Well, possible.
Our species as part of
possible.
And in that movie, the theme is it's too valuable. The ecosystem is too important, too rare to be left to people who are simply going to destroy themselves and a good deal of the rest and threaten the rest. And that's a theme that is relevant in terms of the fact we do not have a vision of how to bring liberation to everybody. So everybody in the orchestra, the poor, we don't pay any attention to them. We let them starve to death. We don't have, we don't have a system in place that allows us to let everyone, in a certain sense, be at a material level of need of things that we have ability to provide now technologically. And on the first side of the destructive, and we don't bother to come up with a system that's relevant to what the future requires for the whole of the system in a bodhisattva way.
That's correct.
Now, how do we deal with that in Buddhism?
Well, we have to educate people that you can't really gain anything. That what you're not really here to gain financially. I mean, look, everyone would like to have a nice financial life, and everyone would like to be set in that way so that you don't have to worry about money, and that you don't really have to care too much about that. That's an important thing. But people are comfortable that way. But when we're talking about political leaders, if we look at someone like Hitler, we have to see someone who's obviously mentally ill, who has attracted other mentally ill people around him. And one of the things that they have in common here is they all believe that they can gain something intangible.
And they have the truth.
They have the truth, right. And they can say to themselves, well, we're gaining this, we're gaining land, we're gaining this, we're gaining that, we're gaining the annihilation of these people that bother us.
Yes, right. There's been a lot of that, hasn't there?
Yes, there has. And so when we look around the world and we see despots around the world, we see mentally ill people feeling that they can gain something. If we look at societies of people, you know, there's nothing, not much is said about groups of mentally ill people, or groups of people that are maybe persuaded to be mentally ill temporarily, and yet we look around the world and we see societies like this. We see, you know, a leader and the followers, you know, and what they do is they hurt other people. So they don't increase the suffering because the suffering is going to be there anyways. They just become the symbol of suffering.
Is it possible not to have suffering? Now, you see,
no.
Well, you seem to use the word suffering, whereas I'm using the word mystery, and I'm thinking in terms of the evolution of universal consciousness. There is suffering, and there's certainly suffering compared to what the future is going to make. We suffered a great loss of ability to communicate at the time of George Washington. It took 3 months to get a letter to London. Now we do it in a nanosecond. On a thing. It's instantaneous.
And it goes around the world before it gets there.
See, so it's in time. And I don't know, the Buddhists have a different sense of time, but we're at a time now where we've reached a certain crescendo in terms of that, you know, in real terms. And then the idea of suffering, existence is suffering, and the way, in a Buddhist thing, the way you get rid of the suffering is to get rid of all desire, get rid of all wanting anything, or but just being in touch with the Dharma, or being in touch with the reality in a way where you're not grasping and that sort of thing.
Right.
Or pushing.
That's the practice. Desire. Those are some of the motivations of suffering.
That's what creates the suffering.
Right.
Okay.
On
the individual consciousness.
That's correct.
Okay.
The state that we wish to get to is the state where we see all things as similar. We see that, you know, we were talking about nirvana. Nirvana is the state where it's all happiness. You only have happiness.
No, but that's nirvana, if I may, nirvana for the individual.
That's nirvana.
Can the individual be happy in a world that's oppressed?
Yes.
Could nirvana be, somebody could sit in front of let's say, the gas chamber at Auschwitz, feeling I'm happy, and watch another 10,000 people put in an oven and roasted to death, and it wouldn't bother him at all. How can they deal with that?
No,
if that's the case?
I can't.
Do you understand what I'm saying? To make the point in absurd
right,
terms.
I can't imagine that.
Okay.
Because, well, we have to see, it's actually a very interesting point that you make, because I'll make this statement and then I'll explain it.
Okay.
We have nirvana and we have samsara. And the ultimate Buddhist understanding is that nirvana and samsara are the same thing, that they're simply two different points of view.
Right. There's ultimate unity of all. It's all one system.
It's all one system.
Thank you.
And we see this
the
person
duality
is suffering, and we see this person is happy.
Yeah.
So with a view like that, you could ignore Auschwitz, possibly, strictly speaking, with a view like that. But that's not the correct understanding. The correct understanding is to help as many people as possible. Yeah. The correct understanding is the bodhisattva understanding.
No, bodhisattva isn't it isn't just it's intrinsic, and it probably is not very easy. If you get to the point where you can go live in a gated community and be safe, and secure and have all the power and everything, it's very hard to go back and care about the people that are outside the gate. And that's the case of what we call our leaders.
Yeah.
And that's practically every political entity in the world we have now,
that's
including the United
correct.
States of America and everybody else. They don't have a vision of a liberation of the whole of the human society with an appropriate ecological context.
They have a liberation of their friends.
Of their friends.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Or what the people that have voted them in office and what they promised them.
Yeah, history is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken, James Joyce said. And we don't have a vision out of we're reifying the ancient notions and structures of society and even spiritual conditions and so forth, that the context has all been qualitatively transformed by time and by the evolutionary process to where we get to a point that we are in now, which is very unique. Maybe like in evolution, it happens in new species. There's quantitative change, and then there's qualitative change, and the new appears. So there may be a new relationship to the universe at this time, and we don't have a vision to realize that because we're all caught up in the dualities of political besting of one over the other.
Absolutely. And you see, also in the Buddhist understanding is that there is no time.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's one way to deal with this conundrum.
Yeah,
right?
There is no time.
Yeah, well,
that it's all things are without beginning or without end.
Well, okay.
So,
now wait a minute.
We're just in there in the middle someplace.
Okay, my thing, I understand what you're saying because you're talking about the larger context, but I would suggest that that's something that awaits our having another level of understanding than that which we've had throughout history.
Well, an enlightened understanding.
And you say you can't know that with certainty. You can know only that if we get to liberation for everybody in the whole system, and we achieve our purpose and that kind of thing, then it will be revealed. But to say that that ultimate reality is knowable from within the womb is arrogant. You can't know that. What you can know is that there's a priori mystery that we'll be introduced into, but we can't know what that is with any certainty to say. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's a big distinction there, right?
Well, the only way is to become enlightened. If you've become enlightened, then you will have an understanding of without beginning or end.
What about this notion that everybody becomes enlightened rather than just the hero?
Well, that would be a wonderful world. Then there would be no one trying to gain anything on anyone else
or needing to, or needing to.
Everyone would want to help each other.
Right.
If one person was hungry, everyone would go to feed them.
Do you notice how we ignore that?
Yes.
We let the people starve. We let women let their kids die because they don't have a handful of grain.
Yeah.
We don't set up a system that allows us to do even what we now are technologically capable of doing within a zero-sum context where you don't have to have one group lose because the other one gains. We've maybe transcended material scarcity in terms of our technological augmentation so that the strictures out of history, and it's only just happened yesterday, a couple decades ago, that we made that transition. And our leaders, our intellectual leaders, fall out. They don't provide an alternative system to inform the political
They don't provide it.
Could we get back? We only got a couple minutes left,
Okay,
3 or 4 minutes left. But we get back to that idea of East and West and that. And one of the things is like Bucky Fuller, Robert Wright writes on this and so forth. But the notion of duality, one of them is male-female. And that would be, I'm just playing with it. It's really hard. But I think it'd be better rather than talking about gender or put East and West. They say East is female, West is gender, male. And there's two things that exist seemingly by the physics of even superstring theory. There's tension and compression. And the image is like this is hard. The image is like a soccer ball. And if you take a soccer ball and you deflate it, and the whole would be like female. And then if you go back 650 million years in evolution, all life forms was unicellular spongiform. There were no advanced systems. There were, no.
They were the form of.
So if you were in that system and you were part of that, and you would say, "This is cool. Let's put up some curtains and make this really nice." There's no reason to exert, as you're saying from the Buddhists. You just accept this and that. You do that. There are various ways of doing that. But if you did, we'd still be in the primordial ooze. But there was a thing that said, move, 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 move. There was an impetus. That would be male. That would be vertical. It's going through it. And then what you need to get is a thing where, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
That would be steady state. We'd still be there. In fact, we probably would never got crossed the line into organic evolution. You know
That's
what I'm saying?
Well, this is the fullness of emptiness.
Okay.
So the fullness of emptiness is always there. It's always there. We can see emptiness as this fullness of love that surrounds us, that permeates everything that we do, that permeates us and everything that we do. It's just pure love.
We want it to
unconditional
permeate
love.
everything.
It does already.
And that would
does already.
Well, I
We
don't
need
think
to
it does
discover
when they
within
put people
ourselves.
in the oven and they let children starve, and that cannot be.
Right.
What I'm saying, we have a capability to have it permeate everyone. Every human being and every creature can be put within a context of liberation or of that. They can do it now through technological augmentation, let's just say. We can feed everybody. There's knowledge. We have the word of time. But they don't have a system that can relate to a thing. You have tension.
There's no
the
political
tension going
system.
through it
No.
is male. The
Yeah.
tension going through it, and the tension of the male has to resonate on the very edge of that to inform the whole, and we don't have intellectual leaders that do that. All they do is fall back and reify outdated institutions that are inherited out of history and are outdated in terms of what the future requires, and they're falling down on the job.
So here we are.
Here we are talking about it.
We have to take personal responsibility for ourselves, and each of us to seek enlightenment. Each of us to follow our path.
Not only seek enlightenment for ourselves, seek enlightenment of the whole system.
Of the whole system.
A whole system
And the
thinking.
simple way to do this is to accept the temporary nature of all things.
Okay.
Everything from the beginning of this program to the end of the program, where was the beginning? The beginning was back there somewhere.
Right.
Everything is temporary.
Yeah,
All
right.
things are temporary.
Okay.
And if we, as people, as an intelligence, if we accept or embrace the temporary nature of all things, really embrace the temporary nature of all things, which in the contemporary world is just about impossible for people to do that.
Yeah.
But if we were to embrace the temporary nature of all things, we would have it. And if all people embrace the temporary nature of all things, then we would have this very thing that you're talking about.
So we get out of the strictures of time.
Yes.
Okay.
There would be no longer a
then
time.
that might be, like in a certain sense, we always had the resources of this earth, but we didn't have the knowledge to make them provide for everybody. And it's on the level of political that we're likely to destroy ourselves and are fighting over scarcity, which we maybe have transcended.
Yes, that's
Isn't it
good.
be nice if somebody mentioned that once in a while, and that our political
I
leaders...
try.
You try. The Buddhists have the political... And you look at the news. Do you ever watch the news? It's all political.
Yeah,
That's all it is. Who's going to win the fight in New Jersey and all that?
It's all
the
political
same
now.
old thing, reifying outdated institutions. All of our institutions are outdated. If we have, in fact, enough for everybody, we need a system that is able to provide that. We don't have any intellectual leadership that can even bring up the issue, let alone introduce the policy decisions and the institutional structures that make it possible so that everybody would be able to be liberated.
That's correct.
We don't have that. We're out of date. So it's very worrying. Maybe they're right to come from outer space and blow it up before we destroy the whole system with our stupid ignorance not listening to the Buddhists.
Right.
And the other spiritual leaders throughout the whole of the evolution of things, and leaving it up to politicians and intellectuals so-called bought by the politicians and coerced and controlled, and they don't have the answer. So they don't... Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
It's very frustrating. Do you think we're going to make...